I think I'm just going to get started because we have amazing folks to hear from today, and I'm really excited to learn about their work. So for folks who are here, we're excited that you joined us today for the Supporting Youth-Led Activism Through Creative Youth Development webinar. My name is Indi McCasey. I'm a creative education consultant in Alameda, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm also a member of the Creative Youth Development CYD National Partnership Field Building Action Team. And I get to be your moderator today. So this video chat is part of a series of online discussions hosted this fall by the Creative Youth Development National Partnership. And it's curated by a national network of CYD practitioners and stakeholders. And so our focus today is going to be hearing from creative youth development leaders who are creating opportunities for youth to use their art to inspire and activate social change. And the way that it's going to work today with the format is that we'll primarily be in kind of a conversational mode, hearing from folks, especially our 4 featured guests. We've got Barton, a poet and artist from Seattle, Washington; Fanon, executive director and co-founder of the Youth Resiliency Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. And he's joined by Amir, who's an awesome youth artist from the Youth Resiliency Institute. And we also have Paula Ortega, a performing artist and activist from Phoenix, Arizona. And before we begin, I just wanted to let everybody know that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll offer a link to the recording. Will be posted at the CYD National Partnerships website, and also emailed to you all. And this webinar is scheduled to last for an hour. And you all, just in case you haven't noticed yet, your lines are muted. If you'd like to ask a question, we have a chat box. And for folks who are on your computer, it's down at the bottom. There's a little chat arrow. And if you click on it on the right-hand side, you'll start to see a white column where you can type in your questions after we hear from our speakers. And we kindly ask that you refrain from unmuting yourself to make sure that we can hear our participants, so we don't hear dogs barking or office random sounds. You should be able to see throughout the presentation both the presenters and the slides simultaneously. If you are only seeing the slides, please check that other windows on your desktop are minimized. And if you're still having trouble, you can always message us in the box. And somebody from the Guild will assist you. So following the webinar, we're going to ask that folks complete a very quick evaluation survey to let us know how the webinar was for you. And now I'm super excited to present our first presenter, Barton, the poet and artist from Seattle, Washington, who works with Arts Core, is going to share with you about their work.
Cool. Thank you. Hi, my name is Ibo. I use they, them pronouns. I am the Teen Leadership Program Manager at Arts Core in Seattle, Washington. Our offices are based in West Seattle, Washington. Some of the things that we do at our Arts Core is that a large part of what I manage is the Youth Speaks Seattle spoken word organization, and organically, like, a lot of their poetry already has a lot of social justice issues within them. But what ends up happening, in my opinion, is that I think at some point we lose the idea that youth have been leading activism since activism has been a thing, right? So like Huey P. Newton was 20 years old, and Sylvia Rivera during Stonewall was 18, you know? So I think that providing these sort of container in which young folks can talk about these issues and then act on them, and then create art towards them is sort of where I lay the basis in terms of Youth Speaks. Another program we do is called OLLI. We call it OLLI, and it stands for the Arts Leadership Liberation Institute. And it's a 2-week program in which young folks get to choose between 1 of 4 pathways, one of which is spoken word poetry, one of which is breakdancing, one is music and music production, and the other is visual art. they get to immerse themselves with different teaching artists for those pathways. But then when they come together, we talk about social justice issues. This year, we were very fortunate to get Nikita Oliver, who was a mayor, running for mayor at some point, and an activist, a woman of color activist, to do social justice 101 training so that we all had this sort of baseline of understanding. And then they went off into their pathways and created arts towards this. I think one of the most important things that we did is we started reimagining our futures. Because one of the bigger ideas that it's happening right now is we keep talking about revolution, but what happens the day after revolution, right? So I think that was one of the things that we've been talking about specifically with Ali. And then in a showcase where they invite their family and friends, all of their art is sort of intertwined with these conversations that we've been having. And then as an independent artist, I'm an advisor for the Gender Justice Center at Seattle U. Again, as an advisor role, this is sort of these particular young folks organization. And I'm just sort of there as like, sort of to fall back on when they start feeling uneasy, right? So like in all of the work that I do, it's sort of just being the structure. And I think that that's where adults often need to be, is sort of providing the structure and providing the foundation and uplifting their own voice, because the youth know what they're doing and know what they're talking about already, right? Specifically in Seattle, I'm showing a couple of photos here, one of which is outside Nova High School. With budget cuts, there was 2 teachers taken away from Nova High School, and they led this particular protest, and it started from young people. And then there was also Garfield High School in the lower right corner, in which the young folks, I believe it was for Black Lives Matter, where they weren't understanding what was happening in the protest. And so they were like, actually, we're just going to do our own, right? So I think that it's up to us as adults and educators to create the space and allow the young folks to take the lead.
Awesome, thanks, Evo. So I'm just writing stuff down. I'm super excited. I used to live in Seattle, and I know about Nova High School, so super, so great to hear about your work there. I'm gonna now turn it over to Fanon and Amir, both coming from Youth Resiliency Institute in Baltimore, where Fanon is the co-founder and executive director, and Amir is a cultural arts organizer. And one thing that I thought was really incredible is that they both are involved with Baltimore Guitarists Against Violence. Amir is a member, Fanon is, I believe, a founder of it. And so I was super excited about it. It seems like they work in kind of multiple organizations, but we look forward to hearing from both of you.
Thank you, thank you. Greetings from Baltimore City. Once again, I'm Fanon Hill, and this is...
I'm Amir.
And Indi was correct. We actually are both involved in the Baltimore Guitarists Against Violence program. But before sharing about that program, I'll share a little history about the Youth Resiliency Institute. We were actually co-founded in 2010 by myself, Navasha Dea, as well as 2 young people whom at the time I was mentoring, who were involved in youth activism throughout Baltimore City. And we are proudly incubated under Fusion Partnerships, Inc., which provides fiscal sponsorship. We see fiscal sponsorship as a form of social justice. There are countless young people, countless grandparents, individuals of all ages throughout Baltimore City who have a lot of wisdom and are interested in activating that wisdom through the development of programming. And so fiscal sponsorship vis-a-vis Fusion Partnerships, Inc. provides them with an opportunity to immediately begin doing the work that we need to see in Baltimore City. So the Youth Resiliency Institute is undergirded by the arts, and we also utilize a culturally relevant rites of passage process, whereas we work with individuals from all age groups, and we definitely work very hard to facilitate opportunities between elders and the youth in our communities. If you look at the screen, you see a gentleman, his name is Uziki Nelson, and he's an artist in Washington, D.C. And the young man who's with him is Razak. Razak is now in high school. And so we work with elders who, more often than not, are artists in their own right. And we see art as an intervention, a tool that allows for transformation of communities. And for young people, it serves as a tool that gives voice, a tool where they're able to mediate their predicament and share wisdom, whether through utilizing guitars or through paintbrushes, so on and so forth. And so with the Baltimore Guitarists Against Violence program, for instance, we utilize guitar music and guitar instruction as an opportunity for young people to begin to give voice and to engage in conversation about trauma in their immediate communities. So not only do they learn guitar music, perform guitar music, but they also meet with family members who have lost loved ones to violence. And collectively, they develop campaigns throughout the community at a community-based level. Now, I'm doing way too much talking. We have Amir here, so I'm going to turn it over to Amir to share a little bit about what you do within the Youth Resilience Institute.
I organize I organize meetings, I organize events for youth to come and participate. And what's something recently that I've done? Recently, I was able to help out and organize with what was it, the thing that we did on here?
Oh, the Arts Festival.
Yes, the Arts Festival. And it was wonderful, wonderful turnout. The mayor came, like a bunch of people came, senators came. And it was really awesome. That was really good experience for me to get and move on with. I was actually able to help plan that. That was really cool. We used to plan things called Youth Kwanzaa Collectives, where we would celebrate Kwanzaa and spread the message of Kwanzaa throughout the communities. And that's pretty much what I do here, is I just organize and make sure everybody is on the same page about stuff. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yay. Thank you both so much. I'm super excited for the questions that are popping up. So for folks who are with us right now, keep thinking of questions while the speakers are talking and sharing their work. If anything comes up where you're like, oh, I want to know more about like how you went about organizing that event, or Amir, how long have you been working, and have you just been going all the way through as like a young artist into this more mentorship role, or was there some kind of space? Ivo, like what other organizations do you collaborate with in Seattle? So as you're taking in this information, participants think also about the questions that you might be able, might want to know more from these awesome speakers. And next up, we have Paula Ortega, who is joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. She's an artist and activist. She's also working, she is currently enrolled at Phoenix College and working on her criminal justice and theater degree, which is awesome. And she's working with a rising youth theater as a youth leader. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for the awesome introduction. Hi, so my name is Paula Ortega, and I'm a youth leader from Rising Youth Theater. And the work that we do is we advocate for youth voice to be heard. The recent projects that we're doing, one of them is called Bodies Are Magic, and it's about young people and how they see their body and how society has a big impact on that, and how there's a body ideal type and how that affects young people in their life, and how they come to a conclusion of forgetting how their body is like really powerful, and how can we find peace within ourselves to love ourselves. And we're doing research throughout that. So our projects are a year long. We do half of the year is a lot of research. We go out in the community and ask questions about the questions that we gather as an ensemble. And then from that, the other year, we create an original performance. And then the awesome thing about the original performance is that we don't perform them at a theater space, like on stage and everything. We actually take them out in the community so the community can be able to see the stories that young people are bringing and issues that matter to them. Because a lot of times, if we perform it in a theater, only, those that have access to arts are only going to be the ones that go to that performance. But what about those that don't know about the arts? And how can we bring the arts to them and present it to them and let them know that the arts are accessible for everyone? So we do that. Another project we're working on is with the Demand to Learn campaign. So the Demand to Learn campaign, it's under the ACLU. And what the Demand to Learn campaign does, they try to help young people stay, like get out of the school to prison pipelines. And something that we're doing right now, we are partnering up with them to become experts on restorative practices and go out with the teachers and teach them about restorative practices and how can we build relationships with the students and teachers. And then another project is at the border of Agua Prieta and Douglas. And right now the project is called Sharing Spaces. So like the cool thing about that is that we gather a group of artists from Douglas and then a group of artists from Agua Prieta, and they create a performance. And then the thing that only divides them is the border, which is really cool and interesting to see, and how like we are all still one and we're united. But Rising Youth Theater, we help young people we provide them with tools. So by tools, I mean things that can help them grow as leaders. We also, so what we do is all free. We try to help young people know that the arts are accessible for everyone. Right now, the youth apprentice artists, the apprentice program that we have 4 youths, and I'm one of them. So what we do, we are one of the ones that make decisions about how rehearsals are gonna go down, what we're going to be talking about, that we go out into perform in different performances, because we talk to young people all the time, but do we really talk to them? So that's what we're trying to make sure we do. We try to make sure we talk to young people and see what they want us and hear what they have to say. I don't know what else I could say.
That's great.
Thank you.
While you're talking, Paula, we had some questions come through from our.
Okay, awesome.
And I'm really excited because there's a lot of already just really juicy questions. The first one is for Fanon and Amir at Youth Resiliency Institute. You mentioned the young man, you had that picture of the mentor and the young man. And someone had a question about how you work with younger ages, like folks between 6 and 12, because they appreciate any suggestions you have about how to adapt social justice programs for younger kids, and wondered if you could speak about that.
Absolutely, and that's a great question. The Youth Resiliency Institute utilizes what we call transformative family engagement within our programming. Now, all too often in communities that are demonized as high poverty, as marginalized, what you usually see is the lack of a focus or the acknowledgement of family structures that exist. If a family structure is a great-grandmother and her grandchildren, then let's celebrate that structure. If a family structure is a uncle or an aunt raising their niece or nephew, then let's celebrate that structure. And so utilizing family engagement has allowed us through the Youth Resiliency Institute to really create entry points for young people of all ages. And so one of the individuals whom we celebrate and see as an icon, a symbol of social justice, is a grandmother, or was a grandmother, by the name of Inez Moore in East Cleveland, Ohio. Now, interestingly, the Youth Resiliency Institute also has programming in East Cleveland, Ohio. We like to organize across state lines. And Inez Moore actually took her case all the way to the Supreme Court from East Cleveland, Ohio. And her case centered around her as a grandmother raising her grandson, Johnny, in her home, which at the time was illegal in East Cleveland, Ohio. And so we utilize the legacy of Inez Moore as a grandmother. All too often, our grandmothers are marginalized and not seen as having anything to offer to social justice movements. And so Inez Moore demonstrates the role that young people of all ages can play. Her grandson, Johnny, he was very aware of the work his grandmother was doing. So we utilize family engagement as a tool, once again, to provide those important entry points. So developmentally, young people are able to share who they are and explore their personal identities in relation to structures and systems.
Thank you, Fanon. Amir, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think he wrapped it up, or he spoke on it very perfect. It was really good, yeah.
Thank you. There's a question about where you find artists to help with your work and if they're paid. And I kind of wondered if anyone could speak to in the organizations that you work with or when you're collaborating, what are the qualities of your artists? Like where do you tend to find the folks that you work with, and then what do you look for in the sort of values that artists have to do this work that's youth-centered? And Ibo, would you be interested in responding first?
Yeah, absolutely. As an independent artist in community that was hired to the organization, I can tell you that we find our artists in community. And I think that it's the type of art that folks are producing and putting out into the world is where we find our artists. And also when we talk about youth, are they already hanging out with us, right? Like, are they already hanging out just for the sake of consuming youth art? And I think that that's really important too, is seeing the value in what the youth create as well. And then are they paid is such a hard question, right? Yes, they are paid. And there's two ways in which that happens. Is that one, our Ali program that I talked about earlier, the Arts Liberation Leadership Institute, is paid for by a large grant, specifically in Seattle. And the other part is that because we are Arts Core, we have a faculty of teaching artists that we also use in order to, get teachers for our programs and whatever workshops. But mostly I will say is that folks in community that the youth are already engaged with.
Awesome, I appreciate that. Paula or Fanon or Amir, is there anything that you wanted to kind of build off what Ibo was saying about where you find your artists for this work?
Hi, so like I mentioned, we have this apprentice program, and the apprentices are in charge of reaching out to youth and talking to different youth that there is. So another program that we have is the apprentices that graduated high school already, they go back to their high school and perform with and create theater with the students at that high school. So that's how we also gather young people. We also partner up with different organizations and we gather with them. We go to different events as well and gather young people. And then a lot of times we have a lot of young people that have been with us for a really long time, and they bring friends in, and it's just like young person connecting young person and connecting young person, which is really awesome. The paying, the way it works, we only pay our apprentices right now. The core team that are youth persons, we do not pay them yet. But right now we're advocating for that.
Yeah, and Fanon and Amir, was there anything that you want to add, just with the question about where you find your artists that hasn't been mentioned?
Yeah, I'll just share that, in cities like Baltimore, specifically in communities that are in the margins in Baltimore, unfortunately, oftentimes when art is spoken of, it's spoken of as a luxury. Whereas, and I think Ibo spoke about this, art is only found in a museum or at a theater. And one of the things that we make sure we do within community-based settings is have an index of the artists whom came out of, developed in those various communities, whether they are musicians, graphic artists, dancers, so on and so forth. So young people of all ages are able to understand that a repository of artistic excellence does indeed exist in one's community, and they have the right and they are in possession of that right to contribute to that repository. And so in the process, they are investing in the future while holding those institutions accountable who don't always like to visit a Cherry Hill in South Baltimore or invest in the arts South Baltimore or in Sandtown, Winchester.
I would also, I can't speak, right? It's good. Yeah, okay. So I was gonna say if grassroots organizations are able to partner with other more prominent organizations that also have artists, that's a great way, or at least for us, that we build our base of artists. I know for me personally, art is something that's very important. It should be celebrated way more than it actually is, especially here in Baltimore, where this is, I want to say it should be an art city. We have art colleges, we have art high schools, art is like all over the communities, and it's not celebrated as much as it should be, especially when we have like big heavy hitters as far as like colleges go, like Johns Hopkins, which is like a medical college, or University of Baltimore, which is like a business college. And when you go or try to like get into a career in the arts, it's more frowned upon than if you were to go into something like business or go into something like medical studies and stuff like that. And it shouldn't be that way, especially with the amount of art that we actually have in the city and the amount of artists that are actually like all around us. So yeah, that's about it. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, everyone. There's some really incredible questions coming from participants, and I wanted to ask folks this question, which is, how do you assess the impact of the work you do with youth in the community? And I also wonder about any struggles you have about translating the work into language that sometimes funders who may not be ready or like understanding of the kind of work that you want to do, like how you translate that. So really, like how are you for yourselves assessing like how this work is affecting young people, but then also how do you translate that to possible funders or like a broader community who may not value it in the same way or really understand it?
Should I begin?
Go ahead, that'd be awesome.
Cool. So with funding, oftentimes they want you to assess with their own tool. And so that is a large part with with having other people fund you. That's just something that has to happen. We also work with consultants in order for the youth to evaluate what they learned at the end of the year, which is also a struggle that I have too, because it feels really gross, to be honest, if I'm being absolutely real at the end. But what that does, and the way we explain it is like, if we want to do this next year, did you have a time and want to do it next year, we do have to do this evaluation in order to get funding. Like we are transparent with the reasons why. I think my personal assessment that I do is what I see happen out in community by youth, right? And then some of the language that's used around whatever it is that they're doing. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but one short story that sounds like it's nothing, but it felt really impactful to me was that there was this literary, they call it a lit crawl in Seattle, where there's like different venues in which they were having poetry performed. And as an adult, I was asked to be part of one. And there was one of, I think, 27 venues, one that was dedicated to youth, and the only performers there were youth, right? So the youth weren't able to access every single part of this literary program. And the venue that I was performing at was at a bookstore, but in the bar in the back. And youth were not allowed in there because it was a bar, right? And in every other instance, you would think that like in any other place in the world, it's a bar, so it's 21 and over, youth are not allowed, period. And nobody would say anything. But some of the youth from our program, were outside and were literally sitting there fighting the door person about how and why. We're not going to drink. What do you think of, like having all of these arguments of like, the police don't care about this small literary event. We're not going to drink, all of this stuff. And, this person has never been fought this way before. Right. And so had no response of like, and kept repeating sort of the same things. It's like, oh, it's just the law. It's just the law. It's just the law. What ended up happening is that show ended up happening on the patio. And that is how I assess, like, particular young person that was sort of leading this argument was not going to let up, and two, gave the option of what else you could be doing, right? And so like that, like small things like that to me prove that something is moving within young people, right? So.
Thank you for that. That's a really powerful story. Paula, Fanon, or Amir, do you either have stories or kind of similarly building off of what Ibo was talking about like how you assess your work?
Sure, that's another great question. The Youth Resiliency Institute has been very fortunate to be able to work with Dr. Deborah Wasserman, who's an amazing educator and artist within her own right. And she has and continues to utilize an evaluation methodology that's known as self-determination theory. Whereas within our work within the Youth Resiliency Institute, we attempt to measure the increase of or any increase in autonomy or self-determination in relation to institutional structure. So a quick story. In South Baltimore, in the Southern District, there were incidents where we had families who were not coming to our program. And we discovered that there were certain police officers in South Baltimore who were extremely brutal in relationship to how they interacted with these families. And so one of the things that we discussed collectively was how to hold these officers accountable. And immediately, the majority of the families we work with, the elders, the parents, the youth, shared that they weren't interested in going to Southern District Police Station to lodge a complaint or to share about their experiences. So what we realized we needed to do so as to increase their self-determination was to organize an art workshop between cadets from Baltimore City's police department or police recruits from class 1401. And we engaged in an art project where there was conversation. And from that experience, we were able to measure an increase in self-determination. And lo and behold, those young people and those families actually, the next month, attended a community relations meeting at Southern District to give voice to some of their concerns. So being able to measure an increase in competency in terms of young people feeling self-determined and confident to walk into a city hall. We hear about civic engagement, the importance of that, but it's not about young people simply walking into a city hall. There's steps that have to be taken as a result of historical realities that families have faced over the decades that must be addressed before those steps can take place. Do you want to share anything? No, I'm going to go play for now.
Paula, if you didn't have anything to add, just because this seems to be really relevant, I don't know if folks have been following in the chat on the side, because it's a lot of fun to multitask when you're in this space. But there's some really great questions specifically coming up around trauma and how you all support youth who may be navigating their own trauma while dealing with these larger issues of police brutality or incarceration, or even just facing adults and having to like argue with adults to like their right to be in a space and like, or to reimagine the space to allow them to be in, themselves to be in. There's a question about what you do specifically when trauma occurs. And then there's also another edge to this question, which is if youth then are, you're supporting them to express maybe or share stories about their trauma, are those stories, do youth have control over how those stories get shared out? I think there was kind of a mentioning that sometimes stories might be shared without youth's permission or used as a way to fundraise or used in this way that's outside of their control. So what do you do to support this process when trauma might come up for young people, and then how are they in control of how their stories get shared? So kind of a question. I don't know if anyone in particular wants to address that first.
Yeah, so I'll go first. So what we do, we do something called story circles. and we all go around the circle and talk about like how this problem made us feel or how something made us feel, and then we all create like support, and we make sure those stories stay in the circle. And what we do to like, after we had like this amount of like stories of like young people getting oppressed, we create like a little performance revolving those stories, but within our own core team that it's in the story circle. And can you tell me a little bit more about the question again? Sorry.
Sure. It was more like when those stories come up, and I know that you all kind of do research within Rising Youth Theater, and then this is out to the community. Are there ever instances where young people have felt uncomfortable around that, or how do you deal with these sort of sensitive stories and people's maybe personal like like how you deal with trauma that may occur either from your audience bringing in community or like as it comes up for your participants? Is that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so story circles is one of them. We are also doing a lot of restorative practices. Not just to like bring like, you know, restorative practices, usually there's a victim and then there's the person that there's something to the victim, but we kind of try to change that a little bit. We try to make sure, so like how can we help you and how can we provide resources for you to, if you're going through something. We also, like the cool thing about Rising Youth Theater is that we create a lot of original performances, and it's device theater. So it allows us to work at the level that the young person is, and it allows us to support them and for them to see that they're not alone and that there's other people around them that are going through stuff like that.
Thanks, Paula. Ivo, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that happens specifically around spoken word poetry is that there is a lot of very real stuff that comes out of these writing and performing. One of the things is that creating that foundation of support between the young people. So, you know, in marginalized communities and with all of our identities, there's never going to be a safe space, right? Like a completely 100% safe space. But what we do is create the community agreements of, you know, what is said here doesn't leave here, but what is learned here leaves here. What kind of space do we create? Like, for instance, you know, we were creating community agreements just the other day, and a lot of the folks wanted it to feel like home, right? Like a home, if not their own, right? Like a home for them. And so creating that network of support and never forcing a young person to re-traumatize themselves for the sake of their art. Right. And so we can talk about hard things, but you don't ever have to perform that, and you don't ever have to share it if you don't want to. But do feel the need to do that. And on top of that, always understanding that art is not going to be the only way that you're going to heal yourself, and providing those resources to go off to next. Right. Like if you are having a hard time with, and I'm not going to give any examples, but if you're having a hard time with something, yes, write about it, use that as an outlet, but also on the flip side of that, where do we get you support that you and resources that you need to go further with that in your healing?
Awesome. I really appreciate that mention of connecting to outside resources, because a lot of you have talked about your partnerships. Like Amir, you had mentioned grassroots orgs partnering with arts organizations. And so, and Ivo, that's a really specific example of just being able to know that it's not, that you all don't have to hold everything, even as an individual organization, and that you can connect with other community assets to be able to provide the support that's needed. Fanon or Amir, is there anything that you wanted to add to this about supporting young people when dealing with really hard or personal topics?
I don't think I don't really formulate a response to that. But.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ivo, what Ivo shared was very important in the sense of partnerships, collaborations. with the Baltimore Guitarists Against Violence program quickly, we partner with Safe Streets, which is a program here in Baltimore City that emphasizes the delivery of a unified message that violence is not acceptable. And so it's important that when working with young people, we don't pretend as if we have all of the answers, even as artists. And there have to be those openings for individuals and institutions, organizations who are credible and respected to be able to assist with that work. Sadly, we don't always see that. We see, far too often fighting between major institutions, structures within city government. And the young people are watching all of this saying, okay, so we're the ones with the problem. Oh yeah, right. So the importance of those collaborations and providing also a space for young people to identify those organizations, those programs that they respect, that they trust, and follow on their lead as well. That's been very important. And I think Amir, with, for instance, Youth as Resources, which you're a member of as well, the work that you all do centered around police within schools and the campaigns you're involved in. You want to share anything about that?
Yeah, sure. So, a little self-promo isn't bad. With Youth as Resources, which is another organization that I work with, I'm working with currently, we're currently working on something called a school police report card. After receiving the news that if you're a student in Baltimore City like myself, you're 10 times more likely to be arrested by school police during the school day than you are if you were in the county or literally anywhere else. And so because of that, we first wanted to see is it because of the students or is it because of the officers? So long story short, it was because of the officers. And so we ended up in Baltimore City. I don't know if this is for any other like counties or like states or anything, but in Baltimore City, we have these little surveys that we have to fill out every year for teachers and the school environment. And it's kind of like a little survey to see if the teachers have been doing what they're supposed to be doing from like the student's perspective, or if the school has been, in like doing the proper things that they're supposed to be doing. If not, what can change? And Youth as Resources has been working to implement one for school police officers, because I might be putting a little bit of my personal opinion in here, but there's no reason that an officer trained on the street should be put in schools to watch and keep children safe. They're not dealing with like hardened criminals on the street. They're dealing with children and students and young adults. Just want you to be there to learn. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Thank you all. I just really appreciate everybody's insight, and especially it seems like there's specific ways that this shows up with how you kind of engage the young people specifically, but then also in the communities that you're living in. I wanted to also just name that there's in the question in the chat, the resources that are being mentioned for Youth Resiliency Institute, the professor or researcher that you work with, Dr. Wasserman. Folks are interested in that. And then also people just wanting to, in here there's someone who just wanted to know how to get in touch with Youth Resiliency Institute and do work together to come and speak with some of their participants. So I really appreciate the love that the audience is kind of giving to these awesome organizers, artists, activists, and keep questions coming. We have about 10 more minutes-ish before we wrap up. But there's another question that came in, and I forgot to mention that, again, all these resources will be emailed out to the folks who are participating in this webinar. But there is a question about what your leadership structure looks like. I know it seems like a lot of folks are in different organizations, but maybe Ibo, thinking about Arts Corps, what your leadership structure looks like, the board of directors, your teacher leaders, and you mentioned the funders that you have to work with, but just how does that, what is it like, and is there anything that you would like to see different about that?
Yeah, so our leadership structure looks like we do have a board of directors. We have 2 spots on our board of directors that are for youth specifically. Youth that are either involved in our programs or directly impacted by our programs and where they are. We have our teaching artists, which are usually, again, artists in our communities. And then we have, so a coordinator who works directly next to me is actually a young person that had formerly been involved in the program that is reaching sort of the maximum age or is past the maximum age, which is the Youth Speaks coordinator that works alongside me. And what was the other question? I'm sorry, I'm an artist and not a money person, obviously, because it hasn't been around me for most of my life. So we have development directors and managers for that sort of thing. But yes, we do get, we go after grants, and we also have private donations as well.
Awesome. I really love the you said 2 positions for young artists on your board. Is that, yeah. And I think that's a really awesome, exciting model. And thanks for the transparency around money and like history. And that's really real. It's, and I wondered, because I know Fanon, you're, executive director and founder of the Youth Resiliency Institute. Can you speak a little bit to like the kind of leadership structure and how you fundraise?
Sure, absolutely. Once again, it has been and continues to be a conscious decision to have a fiscal sponsor, Fusion Partnerships, Inc. They have their own board. The Youth Resiliency Institute does have an advisory board. And we also make sure, as Amir shared when he introduced himself, we have a cadre of cultural arts organizers who develop their own campaigns. We as adults, we support them to the degree that they need our support. And in terms of, the leadership structure, I'm actually a co-founder. We were founded by, once again, 2 young people. That was very important to us, which speaks to the point and importance of this Zoom chat. Thank you so much for organizing this, because historically, in Baltimore, there are a number of youth serving organizations, but one of the reasons why we wanted to establish the Youth Resiliency Institute was because a lot of young people were speaking about not being able to truly authentically give voice within those organizations due to dynamics, power structures that existed. So we're very sensitive to that. But in terms of fundraising, we're always fundraising. The Baltimore Guitarists Against Violence program, interestingly, our budget is 0. All of the guitars we have received have been donated. There was a woman whose husband had passed away from cancer who collected guitars, Mr. James Baldridge, thank you. And his wife found out about our organization and donated over 15 guitars. And so, we're very careful about where we even go for funding. They're philanthropic entities we do not go to because their core values do not align with ours. And so, we have a value system. We honor that value system, and collaboration, once again, making sure that people are aware of what we need, who may be doing similar work or may be interested in volunteering, so we can stay as self-sufficient and self-determined as possible and collectively do this work.
I was going to say, I'm currently getting paid too, so I'm technically working for a funding, like a grant writing organization called Youth as Resources. I mentioned them earlier. And I was going to say, they're mainly who, like, all my experience in like grants, like writing grants, getting, like, receiving funding and everything, they're mainly who I get my experience from. And there was an organization a while back that we were attempting to receive funding from, and their core values, I don't know if they changed or if they just like stopped aligning with ours or what happened, but they weren't exactly what we were looking for in a funder. So we just skipped over them entirely. We went to different sources of funding. And Youth Resiliency Institute has actually received funding from Youth as Resources. How many times? Like
over the years, probably about twice.
Yeah, like twice. So yeah, I can't really speak much on that, but I was a part of the latest funding process from Youth as Resources. Was it later? Or was that Baltimore?
I think that was the last one that
Okay.
you were involved, because this is a new cycle for Youth as Resources.
Mm-hmm.
And to Amir's point, you know, with Youth as Resources, we make sure that the young people whom we work with who do display leadership and an awareness of the importance of social justice, we make sure that they're aware of Youth as Resources, because we like for them to serve as youth leaders and board members on Youth as Resources board. So once again, the importance of collaboration, sharing ideas and best practices amongst organizations, and providing opportunities for young people to experience what it is to be a part of different youth-serving organizations, youth-led organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Amir, what you said just about being able to say, you know, we're not a good match. Like we may need funding to do this work, but if our funders aren't aligned with our value system, we're gonna say that it's not the best match, and we're gonna find somebody else. So I think that shows a lot of grounding in your own values and being able to really align better with folks who share those values. And before we go on to Paula, if you wanted to add anything about the leadership structure, how leadership looks in your organization, I just wanted to first give a shout out to Ashley Hare, who had assembled this group of speakers. She's working with the Guild, and also the Guild staff, Heather, Andrew, Lisette, and everyone else who's making these webinars possible. So just wanted to give that shout out before I give Paula an opportunity to talk about the leadership structure in the organization she works with.
I love you, Ashley. And the way the leadership organization, the way the leadership works is we have the board, and in the board there's 2 youth as well. And I was last year I was part of the board, and it was really interesting to learn how adults make decisions of the money, how they make decisions of like how the organization works. And then under that we have the organizers. And in the organizers team, there is 3 adults and 4 youth. So that's when the apprentices come in. The 4 youth, they all plan rehearsals. They all the youth also get to learn like outlines of how to use technology in their computer. So we do a lot of Excel. Like we all have a different roles. Like for example, for me, I am in charge of youth outreach. I'm in charge of keeping track of the basement, like make sure everything's like nobody's taking things from us. And I also make sure that I am following up with every young person. And then there's the other 3 young persons, which is Ty, Trinity, and Quinn. They're awesome young people, by the way. They have different roles. So Ty is in charge of social media. She has access to all the social media that comes from the organization. She posts pictures. And the cool thing about it is that we are all partnered with an adult. So an adult is mentoring us throughout. They're not just like leaving us and letting us, hey, you know, you do this. They're like mentoring us throughout. And then after that, there is the ensemble, the core team. And then what we do is we partner an adult artist and a youth artist. And what they do is they mentor each other and they talk about like art. So there's this like awesome project that we have called Light Road Plays that we gather 8 performers. We do 8 performances on the Light Road and in the Light Roads on the Light Roads platform. And we partner an adult artist and a youth artist, and they both create theater, a performance together. And it's not just the adult telling the youth, hey, you're gonna do this. The youth is like, nah, I wanna do this and this and this. And the adult supports all of it, which is really cool.
Thank you, Paula. I love that model. There's, just to name some of the things happening in the chat, just to verbalize that. Mark Gonzalez, who it looks like works at Inner City Arts, I think that's in Los Angeles, says, anyone interested in further dialogue about student outcomes and assessment, please email me. And he put his email in the chat box, so you can find it there. We also had someone mentioned, Robert, it looks like, who just, it seems like wanted to say, One key element of social justice is to identify ways that structure leads to dehumanization and to find ways through the art program that achieve elements of rehumanization for the participants. And they give an example, for instance, through mural work, the young artists see their worldview in a larger historical context and use new trend analysis to be able to see their lives into the future and identify what would need to be transformed, either individual or at community levels. I just really love people putting in, these are some long pieces, and just really appreciate folks adding their voice to this conversation. One thing I wanted to ask was just for participants, like it seems like a lot of you have mentioned not only how the young artists you're working with create artwork to address issues that are relevant to them, social issues, but also how they navigate kind of like systems of funding. You're talking about systems of justice, of school to prison pipeline issues within schools. And I just wondered, what's your response to how the creative youth development as a field can respond to helping young people not only create art, but also to navigate these systems around funding, being program administrators, any of that. And Ibo, I wonder if you wanted to address this first.
Sure. So with creative youth development, I feel like one of the first things they learn is community organizing, which is an important skill to have, because you have to get the community invested into your art and what you're doing in order for, anything to happen, specifically around performances. So I think that that's a lot of it. With You Speak Seattle, we have what's called Spokes, which is 12 youth leaders that we've that applied to this process, that do all of this community organizing. And in order to get our audience, you have to find out who they are and what their identities are, and how it aligns with our values and all of that stuff. So I think that that's one of the things. And two, I think that their art is relevant, right? Like it's relevant to what's going on and what's impacting them, and that's what gets the community so like invested into them. And I also think that one of the bigger things in terms of accessibility is that art has been a way of young folks that don't learn in the same ways, in that sort of like teacher silo that feeds into the classroom, is that art has always been the way in which young folks that learn differently absorb information. And so when we talk about creativity, I know a young person that learned geometry via creating a costume for a play, right? Or creating sets for a play. And that's the way they learned how to do geometry, right? And so because we have this idea that because this is the system, this is the way it should work, right? And that we all should absorb information the same. And there are young people who learn about grammar via writing poetry, and how grammar actually doesn't matter, right? So so they learn the different things that they take from these different ways because they want to be involved in it, right? So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and you know what? I totally asked that question, and we're completely out of time, and that was so my bad, because I was so excited about that. No, you're all good. I was getting so absorbed into our conversation. So please, for folks who are in attendance, find these folks. You can find them on the internet, research them. These are amazing artists, activists, educators. Get in touch with them, email them if you have further questions, or if you want to follow up with them about what Creative Youth Development can do to support them. And we hope to see you all in the audience at the Guild's upcoming conference in Baltimore. Fanon and Amir, are you all going to be there?
Sadly, we booked about 2 months ago, prior to the actual conference, studio session for Baltimore Guitarists Against Violence. So studio sessions can be expensive, and they are booked into the month. So sadly, we will not be able to be there, but many of our partnering organizations will definitely be there. Look out for Woundworks and other amazing organizations doing work on the ground here in Baltimore.
Thanks for that. We also wanted to, you'll miss both of them, but you'll be able to meet other organizations from Baltimore. And also we encourage folks to invite young artists to the National Youth Summit that's going to be happening in Baltimore on Saturday, November 17th. as well as joining our newsletter by visiting creativeyouthdevelopment.org. Again, thank you so much for everyone who's been here. Again, we'll email out the whole webinar to folks. This has been an incredible group of people, and take care and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.